against austerity, Michael has long promoted an investment, not cuts agenda, and has written extensively for the Socialist Economic Bulletin. Michael Burke. Thank you.
Thanks, Claudia, for that great introduction. It's quite difficult sometimes when we're discussing collectively our economic policy and what we'd like, because we know that the outcomes we'd like, and actually in many cases they're the outcomes we used to have. I speak to students regularly, obviously the oldest person in the room when I do, but I tell them about when I went to university, how I got a full grant, I paid no fees, and in the holidays I even got a housing benefit. And the reality is, the economy was literally half, because I'm that old, it was literally half the size it is now. Not inflation, actually what we produced was half the amount of what it is now. And yet they are burdened with fees, they get no grants, and their housing costs are just absolutely enormous. And how can that be? How can that be that the economy's double the size, and yet people are worse off? And there's a simple reason for that, is someone else has got the money. Yeah. And so what we have to do is not just think about what outcome we'd like, but I think we have to think about how we're going to get there as well. I think that's the purpose of our discussion. So I want to talk about three things, and I hope it's not three boring things, but I want to talk about economic framework, which I think is quite easily dealt with. And then something, it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, about things like maths, which I know is a turn-off for a lot of people, and then about what's actually going on in the real world. Okay, firstly on the economic framework. In my view, it's been an enormous step forward in how the people in the Labour movement understand economics, with the advent of Jeremy Corbyn as leader and John McDonnell as Shadow Chancellor. It's a really important thing that they've introduced into our thinking, or in fact reintroduced into our thinking, because it's actually correct, it's classical economics. And that is, you need investment to grow the economy. That's the first thing. That's what drives the economy. You can't consume your way to prosperity. You can't say, let's have more of this in terms of what we consume and expect that we're going to be able to magic it up. It doesn't happen. In fact, one of the problems of the British economy over the past period is that we've been doing quite a lot more consuming than we have producing. And we have a big deficit with the rest of the world. So someone else is producing it, we're not. And we're consuming it, and we're growing in indebtedness. And that's why when you take stupid decisions like we did about leaving the European Union, your currency plummets. Because the rest of the world doesn't owe you a living. It's been lending to us. Or as Mark Carney, the Bank of England governor, says, we have to rely on the kindness of strangers. Well, actually, they're not that kind. They're international bond investors. And sometimes they think, actually, if you're going to take really stupid decisions, we're not going to carry on lending to you. And that's what's happening. The pound is falling, and government interest rates are rising, even in an economic crisis, because they've stopped lending to us, or at least they've reduced their lending to us. They may stop altogether. So the economic framework is right. You have to invest, and your borrowing should be directed for investment. And only in that way can you grow the economy and pay for the things we actually want. A decent health service, a decent education system, and so on and so on. So that's the good thing. The not so good thing is a general problem, I think, in British society, which is really people don't like talking about maths. The trouble is you can't do it in economics, because economics is about priorities, and it's about ratios, and it's about proportions, and it's about money, serious stuff. I don't know if anybody heard that strange item on Radio 4 during the week, John Humphreys basically saying he was proud that he was basically functionally enumerate. Why do we need this stuff? And it's quite a bizarre thing, and it's actually a very English thing as well. It's sort of the tradition of aristocratic amateurism that infects British society. We have to start talking about serious numbers and getting ratios and proportions right. So a mate of mine came over one time from Ireland, and lacking anything else to read on the way in from the airport, he got a copy of the Standard. And he said, oh, this is a terrible story, on the front page of the Standard. He said, There's the front page splash headline on the Standard was there was 1 million days lost to sick in the NHS last year. So yeah, it sounds terrible, but at the time there was 1.4 million people working in the NHS. It's actually not many days lost, i.e. it's an understanding of what is in relation to what. That's quite important. So what's in relation to what in the current circumstance? What's in relation to what is things like we're going to have at the end of this Parliament a 22 billion shortage at least in the NHS. How are we going to correct that? Well, if we're going to correct it through investment, we need massive levels of investment in the economy to generate the services, the public sector services that Claudia spoke about, in order to pay for the NHS. It's true for our education system. It's true for everything that we want and value. The level of investment to get the return that's going to pay for the stuff we need is going to have to be massive. That's the real situation. Well, to take one example, just one example, our productivity, which I know is a boring term for people who don't study economics, but it's the stuff we produce per hour. Our productivity is way below the rest of the G7 economies. We would need to invest 4% extra of our GDP just to maintain our level of productivity relative to them and not carry on declining. Why does that matter? Productivity matters is because if we don't produce it, we can't consume it. That's why it matters. And it's not that British people don't work hard. They work longer hours than they do in Germany. They just work with less equipment. They work less efficiently because there's less equipment to work with. That's the reality. We're a less efficient economy, not because we are all lazy and lying in bed. It's because our bosses, the people that own the firms, don't invest enough. That's the reality. So we have to get our investment level up at least to them. That's 4% of GDP. That's just the first thing. Then there's the other thing, of course, is that we live in extraordinary times. And this is the objective situation we're now in. Now, economic forecasting is not a science. But the much derided Treasury document, so-called Project Fear, about what the consequences, the economic consequences of Brexit, are, I think it's probably broadly correct. Their central estimate is that GDP is going to be 7.5% lower over the course of 12 to 15 years. What that means for the likes of you and your families and the people you care about is that you're going to be at least 7.5% worse off. The reality is you're going to be worse off there because that's only an average. And we know what happens when there's a struggle, there's a contest between those that actually produce value in society and those that own the means of production. I.e., they feather themselves and we lose out. So we're going to be about 10% worse off. That means that the level of investment we need to compensate for that is going to be enormous. It's not going to be achievable. What we need is to have continued access to the single market, full membership, because there isn't anything else on offer. That doesn't work. Full membership of the single market, and that includes the benefit of freedom of movement, not the disbenefit, the actual benefit of freedom of movement. That should be our policy, and in line with that, the level of investment that's needed to rescue the British economy. Those are big, big tasks, and it's up to us to do it because, as Diane said in the previous session, the Tories sure as hell ain't going to do it. Thanks very much.